Although it was only 5, the youngsters of the Bradbury residence and Melissa had a very sharp eye. It wasn't really surprising that she was the first to discover something strange had happened to the house on Maple Street, while the Bradbury family was summering in England. She ran, found her older brother Brian, and told him something was wrong upstairs on the 3rd floor. She said she would show him, but not until he swore not to tell anyone what she found. Brian swore, knowing it was their stepfather Lisa was afraid of. Daddy Lou didn't like it when any of the Bradbury children got up to foolishness, and he had decided that Melissa was the prime offender in that area. And Lisa, who was stupid no more than she was blind, was aware of Lou's prejudices, and had become wary of them. In fact, all of the Bradbury children had become rather wary of their mother's second husband. It would probably turn out to be nothing anyway, but Brian was delighted to be back home and willing enough to humor his babysitter. Brian was 2 full years her senior. He followed her down the 3rd floor, on the hallway, without so much as a murmur or an argument, and he pulled out a braid. And he called these braid pulls emergency stops. They had to tiptoe past Lou's study, which was one of the only finished rooms up here, because Lou was inside, unpacking his notebook and papers and muttering in ill-tempered ways. And Brian's thoughts had actually turned to what might be on TV tonight, and he was looking forward to a pig out on good old American cable after 3 months on the BBC, when they reached the end of the hall. What he saw beyond the tip of his little sister's pointing finger drove all thoughts of television from Brian Bradbury's mind. "I'll swear again," Lisa whispered. "Never tell anyone, Daddy Lou. Anyone. Or hope to die. Hope to die." Brian agreed, still staring. And it was a half hour before he told his big sister Lori, who was unpacking in her room. Lori was possessive of her room, as only an 11-year-old girl can be, and she gave Brian the very dickens for coming in without knocking, even though she was completely dressed. "Sorry, but I gotta show you something. It's really weird." "Where?" She went on putting clothes in her drawers as if she didn't care, as if there was nothing any dopey little 7-year-old could tell her, which would be the slightest of interest. But when it came to eyes, Brian's weren't exactly dull. He could tell where Lori was interested, and she was interested now. "Upstairs, 3rd floor, into the hall past Daddy Lou's study." Lori's nose wrinkled, as it always did, when Brian or Lisa called him that. And she and Trent remembered their real father, and they didn't like his placement at all. They made it their business to call him just plain Lou. That Louis Evans clearly did not like this, found it vaguely impertinent in fact, and simply added to Lori and Trent's unspoken but powerful conviction that it was the right way to address the man their mother slept with these days. "I don't want to go up there. He's been in a bad mood ever since we got back. Trent says he'll stay that way until school starts, and he can settle back into his rut again. But his door's shut. We can be quiet. Lisa and me went up. He didn't even know we were there." "Lisa and I. Yeah, us anyway. It's safe. The door's shut, and he's talking to himself like he does when he's really into something. Oh, I hate it when he does that. Our real father never talked to himself. He didn't used to lock himself in a room. Well, I don't think he's locked in. But if you're really worried about him coming out, take an empty suitcase. We'll pretend like we're putting you in the closet where we keep them. If he comes out, that is." "So what is this amazing thing?" Lori demanded, putting her fists on her hips. "I'll show you. We have to swear on Mom's name and hope to die if you tell anyone." He paused, thinking for a moment, and then added, "You especially can't tell Lisa, because I swore to her." Lori's ears were finally all the way up. It was probably a big nothing, but she tired of putting clothes away. It was really amazing how much junk a person could accumulate in 3 months. Okay, I swear. And they took along 2 empty suitcases, one for each of them. But their precautions proved unnecessary. Their stepfather never came out of his study. It was probably just as well. He had worked up a grand head of steam from the sound, and the 2 children could hear him, stamping about, muttering, opening drawers, slamming them shut again, and a familiar odor seeped out from under the door. To Lori, it smelled like smoldering athletic socks, and Lou was smoking his pipe. She stuck her tongue out, crossed her eyes, twiddled her fingers by her ears, and then tiptoed by. But a moment later, when she looked at the place Lisa had pointed out to Brian, and which Brian now pointed out to her, she forgot Lou just as completely as Brian had forgotten about all the wonderful things he could watch on the TV that night. What is it? My gosh. What does it even mean? I don't know. But just remember, you swore on Mom's name, Lori. Lori held on for over 1 full hour before getting Trent and showing him. She made him swear too, and her confidence that Trent would keep his promise not to tell was perfectly justified. He was almost 14, and as the oldest, he had no one to tell, except grown-ups. Since their mother had taken to her bed with a migraine that left only Lou, and that was the same as not anyone at all, the 2 oldest Bradbury children hadn't needed to bring up empty suitcases as camouflage this time. Their stepfather was downstairs watching some British fellow lecture on the Normans and Saxons. The Normans and Saxons were Lou's specialty at the college, and he was enjoying an afternoon snack, a glass of milk and a ketchup sandwich. Trent stood up at the end of the hall, looking at what the other children had looked before him, and he stood there for a long time. What is it, Trent? Lori finally asked. It never crossed her mind that Trent wouldn't know. Trent knew everything. So she watched, almost incredulously, as he slowly shook his head. I don't know, he said, peering into the crack. Some kind of metal, I think. Wish I brought a flashlight. He reached into the crack and tapped. Lori felt a vague sense of disquiet at this and was relieved when Trent pulled his finger back. Yeah, it's metal. Oh, should it be in there? I mean, was it in there before? That metal wall is something new. I wonder how much of it there is and how far it goes. It's just up here on the 3rd floor. Or what? Lori looked at him with big round eyes. She began to be a little frightened. Or is it all over the house? Later, Trent glanced pointedly up at the clock on the wall of his room, where they had all gathered. It was 20 after 3. He really didn't have much more to say. Their mother had been up this morning to get Lou his breakfast. 2 3-minute eggs with whole wheat toast and marmalade was the only way he took it. But afterwards, she had gone back to bed, and there she remained. She suffered from dreadful headaches, migraines that sometimes spent 2 or even 3 days snarling and crawling at her defenses. She would not be apt to see them on the 3rd floor and wonder what they were up to. But Daddy Lou was a different kettle of fish altogether. With his study just down the hall from the strange crack, they could count on avoiding his notice and his curiosity. Only if they conducted their investigation while he was away. And that was what Trent's pointed glance at the clock had meant. Listen to me, you guys, he said, and was gratified to see they actually were listening. Their differences and recriminations forgotten in the excitement of an investigation. They had been caught up by Trent's inability to explain what Lisa had found. All 3 of them shared, at least to some extent, Brian's simple faith in Trent. If Trent was puzzled about something, if Trent thought something was strange and just possibly amazing, they all thought so. Lori spoke for all of them when she said, "Just tell us what to do, Trent will do it." Okay. We'll need some things." He took a deep breath and began explaining what they were. Once they were convened around the crack at the end of the third-floor hallway, Trent held Lisa up so he could shine a beam of a small flashlight. It was the only one their mother used to inspect their ears, their eyes, noses when they weren't feeling well. They put it into the crack. They could see the metal. It wasn't shiny enough to throw back a clear reflection of the beam, but it shone silkily just the same. Steel was Trent's opinion. Steel or some sort of alloy. "Trent, what's an alloy?" Brian asked. Trent shook his head. He didn't know exactly. He turned to Lori and asked her to give him the drill. Brian and Lisa exchanged an uneasy glance as Lori passed it over. It had come from the basement workshop. The basement was the one remaining place in the house, which was their real father's. Daddy Lou hadn't been down there a dozen times since he'd been married to Catherine Bradley. The smaller children knew that as well as Trent and Lori. They weren't afraid of Daddy Lou. They weren't afraid he'd noticed someone had been using the drill. It was the holes on the wall outside the study they were worried about. Neither of them said this out loud, but Trent read it on their troubled faces. "Look," Trent said, holding the drill out so they could get a good look. "This is what they call the needle point of a drill, okay? See how tiny it is? Since we're only going to drill behind the pictures, I don't think we have to worry, guys." There were about a dozen framed prints along the third-floor hallway, and all of them beyond the study door. And on the way to the closet at the end of the suitcases were stored. Most of these were very old and mostly uninteresting. Views of Titusville. That's where the Bradburys lived. "He doesn't even look at them, let alone behind them," Lori said, still nervous. Brian touched the trip of the drill with one finger and then nodded. Lisa watched, then copied both the touch and the nod. If Lori had something was okay, it probably was. If Trent said so, it almost certainly was. And if they both said so, there could be no question. Lori took down the picture, which hung on the closet to the small crack in the plaster, and gave it to Brian. Trent drilled. They stood watching him in a tight little circle of three, like infielders encouraging their pitcher at a particularly tense moment of the game. The drill bit went easily into the wall, and the hole made its every bit into the ground as promised. The darker square of wallpaper, which had been revealed when Lori took the prints off its hook, were also encouraging. They suggested that no one had bothered taking the dark line engraving of the Titusville Public Library off its hook for a very long time. And after a dozen turns of the drill's hand, Trent stopped and reversed, pulled the bit free. "Why'd you quit?" I hit something hard. Think it's more metal. Sure wasn't wood. Let's see." He shone the light in and cocked his head this way and that way before shaking it decisively. "My head's too big. Boost Lisa up here." Lori and Trent lifted her up, and Brian handed her the pen light. Lisa squinted for a long time, then said, "It's just like in the crack I found." "Okay, next picture." And the drill hit metal behind the second, and the third as well, behind the fourth. By this time, they were quite close to the door on Lou's side. It went all the way in before Trent pulled it out. This time, she was boosted up. Lisa told them she saw... "Hey, I see the pink stuff." "Yeah, that's insulation." "Okay, let's try the other side." They had to drill behind 4 pictures on the east side of the corridor before they stuck the first wood lath of the insulation behind the plaster. And as they were rehanging the last picture, they heard the out-of-tune snarl of Lou's elderly Porsche turning into the driveway. Brian, who had been in charge of hanging this picture, he couldn't just reach the hook on the tiptoe, dropped it, and Lori reached out and grabbed it by the frame on its way down. A moment later, she found herself shaking so badly she had to hand the picture to Trent, or she would have dropped it herself. "Go. Downstairs TV room." The back door slammed. Lou came in. "But it's not straight. Trent, it's not... Never mind. Lori cut in. Do what Trent says. And Lori and Trent looked at each other, wide-eyed. If Lou went into the kitchen to fix himself a bite to tide himself over until supper, all still might be well. And if he didn't, he would meet Lisa and Brian on the stairs. One look at them, he'd know something was going on. And the two younger Bradbury children were old enough to close their mouths, but not their faces. And Brian and Lisa went fast. Trent and Lori came behind, more slowly, listening. It was a moment of almost unbearable suspense. And the only sound were the little kid's footsteps on the stairs. And then, Lou bawled up from them from the kitchen. Keep it down! Your mother's taking a nap! And if that doesn't wake her up, Lori thought, nothing will. And during the next week and a half, they drilled other small holes around the house when there was no one around to see them. Holes behind the posters in various rooms, behind the refrigerator and the pantry. Brian was able to squeeze in, just had room to use the drill in the downstairs closet. And Trent even drilled one in a dining room wall, high up and in one corner where the shadows never quite left. And he stood on top of the stepladder, where Lori held it steady. There was no metal anywhere, just lath. The children forgot for a little while. And one day, about a month later, after Lou had gone back to teaching full-time, Brian came to Trent and told him there was another crack in the plaster on the third floor, that he could see some more metal behind it. Trent and Lisa came at once. Lori was still in school at band practice, as on the occasion of the first crack, their mother was lying down with a headache. Lou's temper had improved once he was back at school, as Trent and Lori had been sure it would. But he had had a crackerjack argument with their mother the night before about a party he wanted to have for fellow faculty members in the history department. If there was anything the former Miss Bradbury hated and feared, it was playing hostess to a faculty party. Lou had insisted on one, however. She had finally given in. Now, she was lying in a shadowy bedroom with a damp towel over her eyes and a bottle on the night table, while Lou was presumably passing around invitations in the faculty lounge, clapping his colleagues on the back. And the new crack was on the west side of the hallway, between the study and the stairwell. You sure you saw metal up there? We checked that side, didn't we? Well, look for yourself. Well, they started drilling again, and this time they found metal behind all the walls on the third floor, including Lou's study. Trent snuck in there one afternoon with the drill while Lou was at the college and their mother was out shopping for the upcoming faculty party. The former Miss Bradbury looked very pale. She looked drawn these days, and even Lisa noticed. But when any of the children asked her if she was okay, she always flashed a troubling, overbright smile and told them never better, and the pink rolling in clover. Lori, to be blunt, told her she looked too thin. But oh no, her mother responded. Lou says she was just turning into a blob over in England. All those rich teas. But Lori knew better. But not even Lori was blunt enough to call her mother a liar to her face. If all four of them had come to her at once, and ganged up on her, so to speak, they might have gotten a different story. But not even Trent thought of doing that. One of Lou's advanced degrees was hanging on the wall over his desk in a frame, while the other children clustered outside the door, nearly vomiting with terror. Trent removed the frame degree from its hook, laid it on the desk, and drilled a pinhole in the center of the square where it had been. 2 inches in, the drill hit metal. Trent carefully rehung the degree, making sure it wasn't crooked, and came back out. It hasn't finished growing in here, Lori said. Trent looked at her. Huh? Before they could reply, Brian had a brainstorm. Try the floor, Trent. See if it's in there, too. Trent thought it over, shrugged, and drilled into the floor. Drilled into Lori's room. The drill went all the way with no resistance. But when he peeled back the rug at the foot of his own bed, he soon encountered solid steel, or solid whatever it was. And then, at Lisa's insistence, he stood on his stool and drilled up into the ceiling, eyes slitted against the plastered dust that sifted down into his face. More metal. Let's quit for the day, guys. Lori was the only one who saw how deeply troubled Trent looked. Trent found what he was looking for 2 days before the big party. As the oldest, he should have been noticed, but his mother had begun to look alarmingly unhealthy. Her skin drawn shiny over her cheekbones, her complexion so pale it had taken on an ugly yellow underlight. He should have noticed how often she'd been rubbing at her temples, although she denied, almost in a panic, that she had a migraine, or had had one for over a week. He did not notice these things, however. He was too busy looking. In the 4 or 5 days between his after-bedtime talk with Lori and the day he found what he was looking for, he went through every closet in the big old house at least 3 times, through the crawl space above Lou's study 5, 6 times, through the big old cellar half a dozen times. It was in the cellar, finally, when he found it. It's not to say he hadn't found peculiar things in other places. He most certainly had. There was a knob of stainless steel poking out of the ceiling of a second-floor closet. A curved metal armature of some kind burst through the side of the luggage closet on the 3rd floor. It was a dim, polished gray, until he touched it. When he did that, it flushed a dusky rose color, and he heard a faint but powerful humming sound deep in the walls. And he snatched his hand back in the armature. The humming stopped at once. The day before, in the attic, he had observed a cobweb of thin, interlaced cables growing in low, dark corners around his eyes. Trent had been crawling around on his hands and knees, not doing anything but getting hot and dirty, when he suddenly spied this amazing phenomenon. He froze in place, staring through a tangle of hair as the cables swung themselves out of nothing at all, so it looked anyway, and met or wrapped around each other so tightly they seemed to merge, and then continued spreading until they reached the floor, where, when they drilled in and anchored themselves in dreamy little puffs of sawdust, they seemed to be creating some limber bracework. And it looked as if it would be very strong, able to hold the house together through a lot of buffeting and hard knocks. But what buffeting, though? What hard knocks? Again, Trent thought he knew. It was hard to believe, but he thought he knew. Trent asked. Lori dropped the quarter on the telephone with no further protest. It rang so many times that she became sure their mother had gone out. That might be good, but it might also be bad. It was certainly worrisome. If she was out, it was entirely possible that she might come back before. Trent, I don't think Hello? Miss Evans said in a sleepy voice. Oh, hi, Mom. Didn't think you were there. I went back to bed. I can't seem to get enough sleep all of a sudden. I suppose if I'm asleep, I can't think about how horrible I was last night. Oh, Mom, you weren't horrible. When a person faints, it isn't because she wants to. Lori, why are you calling? Is everything okay? Sure, Mom. Trent poked her in her ribs, hard. And Lori, who had been stamping and growing smaller, it almost seemed, straightened up in a hurry. Mom, I hurt myself in gym, just, a little. It's not bad. What did you do? You're not calling from the hospital, are you? Oh gosh, no. Just a sprained knee. Miss Kidd asked if you could come and bring me home early. I don't know if I can walk on it. It really hurts. I'll come right away. Try not to move it at all. You could have torn a ligament in there. Is the nurse there? Not right now. Don't worry, Mom. I'll be careful. You'll be in the nurse's office, though. Yes. Her face was red as the sight of Brian's radio flyer wagon. Well, I'll be right there. Thanks, Mom. Bye. She hung up, looked at Trent. She drew in a deep breath and then let it all out long, trembling in the sigh. "That was fun," she said in a voice close to tears. He tugged her tight. "You did great. Lots better than I could have. Lori, I'm not sure she would have believed me. I wonder if she'll ever believe me again." "She will. Come on." They went over to the west side of the park, where they could watch Walnut Street. The day had turned cold and grim. Thunderheads were formed overhead, and a chilly wind was blowing. They waited for 5 endless minutes, and then their mother's Subaru passed them, heading rapidly toward Greensdown Middle School, where Trent and Lori went. Where we go when we're not playing hooky, that is, Lori thought. She's really humming. I hope she doesn't go into an accident or something. It's too late to worry about that now, come on. Lori had Trent's hand and was pulling him back to the telephone. You get to call Lou, you lucky devil. He put in another quarter and punched the number at the history department office, referring to a card he had taken from his wallet. He had barely slept a wink the night before, but now that thing were all set in motion. He found himself calm. So cool, in fact, that he was almost refrigerated. And he glanced at his watch. 2:45, less than an hour to go, and thunder rumbled faintly in the west. History department, a woman's voice said. Hi, this is Trent Bradbury. I need to speak with my stepfather, Lewis Evans. Professor Evans is in class, but he'll be out. I know. He's got modern British history until 3:30, but you better get him just the same. It's an emergency. It concerns his wife, my mom. Then there was a long pause. Trent felt a moment of faint alarm. It was as if she were thinking of refusing or dismissing him, emergency or no emergency, and that was most definitely not in the plan. Well, he's in Oglethorpe right next door. I'll get him myself. I'll call him, and I'll have him call you. How's that? No, I have to hold on. But, please, will you just stop goofing with me and go get him? He asked. Well, all right, the secretary said. It was impossible to tell if she was more disgruntled or worried. If you could just tell me the nature... No, Trent said. There was an offended sniff, and then he was on hold. I'm on hold, he told Lori. Trent shrugged. He'll come. You wait and see. He wished he could be as confident as he sounded, but he stood still, believed this would work. It had to work. Trent nodded. They had left it awful late, as Lori had just said, and Lori knew why. The study door was solid oak, plenty strong, but neither of them knew anything about the lock. Trick wanted to make sure Lou had only the shortest time possible to test it. What if he sees Brian and Lacey in the corner? You know, when he gets home? Well, if he gets hot under the collar, as I think he will, he wouldn't notice them. Why doesn't he answer the phone? Lori asked, looking at her watch. He will, Trent said. And then, their stepfather did. Hello? It's Trent, Lou. Mom's in her study. Her headache must have come back because she's fainted. I can't wake her up. You'd better come home right away. And Trent was not surprised at his stepfather's stated object of concern. It was, in fact, an integral part of his plan. But it still made him angry. His fingers turned white on the telephone. Oh, my study? My study? What was she doing in there? In spite of his anger, Trent's voice came out calmly. Cleaning, I think. There are papers all over the floor. I'll be right there. If there are any windows open in there, shut them. There's a storm coming, understand? And he hung up without saying goodbye. Well, he's on his way. The man was so stirred up he didn't ask. They ran back to the intersection of Maple and Walnut. The sky had grown very dark now. The sound of thunder had become almost constant, and they reached the blue of U.S. mailbox in the corner. The streetlights along Maple Street began to come on 2 by 2, marching away from them up the hill. And Lisa and Brian hadn't arrived yet. "I want to come with you, Trent," Lori said, but her face proclaimed her a liar. It was very pale, and her eyes were too large, swimming with unshed tears. "No way. Wait here for Brian and Lisa." At their names, Lori turned and looked down Walnut Street. She saw 2 kids coming, hurrying along with lunchboxes bouncing in their hands. Although they were too far away to make out faces, she was pretty sure it was them. And she told Trent, "Good. The 3 of you get behind Miss Redland's hedge, there, and wait for Lou to pass. Then you come up the street, but don't go in the house, and don't let them either. Wait for me outside." "I'm afraid, Trent." "Me too." And he kissed her swiftly on the forehead. "But it'll all be over soon." Before she could say anything else, Trent went running up the street toward the Bradburys' house on Maple Street, and he glanced at his watch as he ran. It was 12 past 3. The house had a still, hot air, and it scared him. It was as if a gunpowder had been spilled in every corner, and people he could not see were standing by to light unseen fuses. And he imagined the clocks in the wine cellar ticking relentlessly away, now reading just 20 minutes. What if Lou was late? No time to worry about that now. Trent raced up to the 3rd floor, the still, combustible air. He imagined he could feel the house stirring now, coming alive as the countdown neared its conclusion. He tried to tell himself that imagination was all it was, but part of him knew better. He went into Lou's study, opened 2 or 3 file cabinets and desk drawers at random, and threw the papers he found all over the floor. This took only a few moments, but he just finished when he heard the Porsche coming up the street. Its engine wasn't snarling today. Lou had wound it up to a scream. Trent stepped out of the office and into the shadow of the 3rd floor hallway. He rammed his hand into his pocket for the key, and his pocket was empty except for an old crumpled lunch ticket. He must have lost it on the street, he thought. It must have bounced right out of his pocket. And he stood there, sweating and frozen, as the Porsche squealed into the driveway. Its engine cut out, and the driver's door opened and slammed shut, and Lou's footsteps ran for the back door. Thunder crumped like an artillery shell in the sky. A stroke of bright lightning forked through the gloom, and somewhere deep in the house, a powerful motor turned over, uttered a low, muffled bark, and then began to hum. Jesus, oh dear, what do I do? What can I do? He's bigger than me. If I try to hit him over the head... He had slipped his left hand into his pocket, and his thoughts broke off as if touching the old-fashioned metal teeth of the key. At some point during the long afternoon in the park, he must have transferred it from one pocket to the other without even being aware of it. Gasping, heart galloping in his stomach and throat as well as his chest, Trent faded back down to the hall of the luggage closet, stepped inside and pulled the accordion-style door most of the way shut in front of him. Lou was galloping up the stairs, bawling his wife's name over and over at the top of his voice. Trent saw him appear, standing up over the spikes. He must have been rushing a hand through as he drove, the tie askew, big drops of sweat standing on his broad, unintelligent forehead, eyes squinting down to furious little slits. "Catherine!" Before he could even get all the way back in, Trent was out in the luggage closet, running soundlessly back down the hall. He would have just one chance. If he missed the keyhole, if the tumblers failed to turn at the first twist of the key. If either of those things happened, he could fight with them. He had time, he thought. I can't stand him alone. I'll make sure to take him with me, I guess. He grabbed the door and banged it shut so hard that a little film of dust shot out of the cracks between his fingers. He caught one glimpse of Lou's startled face, Then the key was in the lock. He twisted it, and the bolt shot across in an instant before Lou struck the door.
Hey! Hey, you little... What are you doing? Where's Catherine? Let me out of here!
The knob twisted fruitlessly back and forth and stopped, and Lou rained a fusillade of blows at the door.
Let me out of here! Right now, Trent! Trent Bradbury! You're gonna get the worst beating of your life!
And Trent backed slowly across the hall. When his shoulders struck the far wall, he gasped. The key to the study, which he had removed from the keyhole without even thinking about it, dropped from his fingers and thumped to the faded hall runner between his feet. Now that it was done, reaction set in. The world began to look wavery, as if he were underwater, and he had to fight to keep from fainting himself. Only now, with Lou locked in, his mother sent off on a wild goose chase, and the other kids safely tucked away behind Miss Redland's overgrown yawn hedge, did he realize he had never really expected it would work at all. If Daddy Lou was surprised to find himself locked, Trent Bradbury was absolutely amazed. And the doorknob of the study twisted back and forth, sharp half circles.
Let me out!
I'll let you out at 4:45, Lou, Trent said in an uneven, trembling voice. And then a little giggle escaped him. If you're still here at 4:45, that is. Then from downstairs, Trent, are you all right? That was Lori. Are you there, Trent? And Lisa. Hey, Trent, you okay? And Brian. Truck looked at his watch and was horrified to see that it was 3:31, going on 3:32. Suppose his watch was slow.
Get out!
He screamed at them, plunging down the hallway toward the stairs. Get out of the house! The third-floor hallway seemed to stretch out before him like taffy. The faster he ran, the farther it seemed to stretch out ahead of him. Lou rained blows on the door and cursed on the air. Thunder boomed. From deep within the house came the even more urgent sound of machines waking to life. He reached the stairwell at last, hurried down, his upper body so far in front of his legs he almost fell. Then he was whirling around the newel post and hurtling down the flight of stairs between the second floor and the first, toward where his brother and two sisters waited, looking up at him. Out! He screamed, grabbing at them. Quick! Trent, what's happening? What's happening to the house? It's shaking. It was, too. A deep vibration that rose up through the floor and rattled Trent's eyeballs in their sockets. Plaster dust began to sift down into his hair. Trent swept Brian into his arms, and Lori grabbed Lisa under the arms of her dress and stumbled out the door with her. Thunder bammed. Thunder twisted across the sky. The wind of it grasping earlier now began to roar like a dragon. Trent heard an earthquake building under the house, and as he ran out through the door with Brian, he saw electric blue light, so bright it left afterimage on his eyes for almost an hour. He reflected later he was lucky not to have been blinded. It cut across the lawn and raised. It looked almost solid, and he heard the glass break. And just as he passed through the door, he felt the house rising under his feet. And he jumped down onto the front steps and grabbed Lori's arm. And they stumbled, staggered down the walk to the street, which was now black as night, the coming of the storm where they turned back and watched it happen. The house on Maple Street seemed to gather itself. It no longer looked straight and solid. It seemed to jitter, like a comic strip picture of a man on a pogo stick. Huge cracks ran out from it, not only in the cement wall but in the earth surrounding it. And the lawn pulled apart in huge pre-shaped curves of grass. Roots strained blackly upward. Below the green, and the whole front yard seemed to become bubble-shaped, as if it were straining to hold the house before it was able to spread too long. Trent cast his eyes up to the third floor, where the light of Lou's study still shone. And Trent thought the sound of breaking glass had come was still coming from up somewhere, then dismissed the idea as imagination. How could he hear anything in all the racket? It was only a year later that Lori told him she was quite sure she had heard their stepfather screaming up there. The foundation of the house first crumbled, then cracked, then sundered with the croak of exploding mortar. Brilliant cold blue fire lanced out, and the children covered their eyes and staggered back. The engines screamed, and the earth pulled up in a last agonized holding action, and then it let go, and suddenly the house was a foot above the ground, resting on a pad bright blue fire. It was a liftoff. A perfect liftoff. Atop the center roof peak, the weather vane spun madly, and the house rose slowly at first, then began to gather speed. It thudded upward on its flaring pad of blue fire, the front door clapping madly back and forth as it went. "My toys," Brian said, and Trent began to laugh wildly. The house reached a height of 30 yards, seemed to poise itself for its giant leap forward, then blasted into the rushing spat of night-black clouds. It was gone. 2 shingles came floating down like large black leaves. "Look out, Trent!" Lori cried. The rubber-backed welcome mat thwacked into the street, where he had been standing. Trent looked at Lori. Lori looked back. "That would have smarted like Big Blue if it hit you in the head. So you better not call me Sprat anymore, Trent." He looked at her solemn for several seconds, then began to giggle. Lori joined in. So did the little ones. Brian took one of Trent's hands, and Lisa took the other. They helped him pull up to the feet, and then the 4 of them stood together, looking at the smoking cellar hole in the middle of the shattered lawn. People were coming up from their houses now, but the Bradbury children ignored them, or perhaps it would be truer to say that Bradbury children didn't know they were there at all. "Wow. Our house took off, Trent." "Yeah." Trent and Lori put their arms around each other and began to shriek with the mingled laughter and horror. And that was when the rain began to pelt down, and Mr. Slattery from across the street joined in. He didn't have much hair, but what he did have was plastered and gleaming skull in tight little bunches. "What happened? What happened here?" And Trent got up to his sister and looked at Mr. Slattery. "I guess a true space adventure?" Mr. Slattery cast a doubtful, frightened look at the empty cellar hole, decided discretion was the better part of valor, and retreated to his side of the street. Lori leaned toward Trent and whispered into his ear, "We're free. It's better than that. She is." And then he put his arms around them all. And they sat on the curb in the pouring rain and waited for their mother to come home.